If you're a musician, you've probably heard of the collection of notes known as the pentatonic scale. Penta meaning 5, and tonic meaning tones. So the 5-tone scale, the scale of 5 notes. But just in case you need it, here it is. Or, if we start the scale on A, which is the relative minor to C major, we get the minor pentatonic scale. It's the same notes, just in a different order. And to say the scale is commonly used in music would be an understatement. It seems to have arisen from our collective aural unconscious a really long time ago, and it permeates all geographical and cultural borders in an almost archetypal, primordial sort of way. In fact, archaeologists have discovered flutes made of bone that are somewhere around 40,000 years old. Guess what scale they're tuned to? They're pentatonic. So it goes without saying that the pentatonic scale is pretty deep in our musical DNA as human beings. We find the scale in Eastern and Western European folk music, South American folk music, traditional Chinese and Japanese music, African music, Native American tribal chants. The scale is also prevalent in blues and jazz. A lot of the pop melodies today are still based on the pentatonic scale. The human ear just likes it. I don't know why. Maybe because it has no half steps, or maybe because there are no dissonant tones that seem to demand a resolution to more stable ones, like the 4th and 7th scale degrees from the major scale do. Which just happen to be the 2 notes missing from the pentatonic scale? Anyway, that's a topic for another video. But there's a slightly different version of the pentatonic scale. This is sometimes called the altered pentatonic scale, or sometimes the major flat 3 pentatonic. Perhaps Dorian pentatonic would also be a good name. That seems to capture the haunting, minorish, modal sound you get when you play the scale by itself with no harmonic accompaniment. But whatever you choose to call it, it sounds like this. All you do is lower the 3rd note by a half step from major to minor, and you get a minor or Dorian sounding pentatonic scale. By the way, it's a great idea to go ahead and start thinking of the notes of each scale in scale degrees, rather than just notes, using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, instead of C, D, E, G, A. This can make it easier to move the scale around to different keys later on. And so simply by altering this one note, we can open up a whole new world of harmonic and melodic possibilities with the scale. Let's explore a few of these. We'll start with the most obvious and basic applications, and move on to slightly more complicated ones later on. Dorian and minor sonorities. This scale works very nicely over any minor triad, minor 6th, or even minor 7th chord. Really anytime you're trying to establish a Dorian kind of sonority with your line. In fact, the scale could be thought of as a minor 6-9 chord laid out in stepwise fashion. Here's an example of how John Coltrane uses the scale in his solo on Impressions. So for tunes like So What, Little Sunflower, Impressions, Recordame, Black Narcissus, or anytime you have an extended modal vamp, give this scale a workout and see what you come up with. Here's a little bit of me playing with the scale to give you some ideas. This scale can also offer us some really nice sounds over dominant chords. If we analyze the scale relative to a dominant seventh, it gives us the 5th, 6th, or 13th if you like, the 7th, the 9th, and the 3rd. So the functional tones are there, the 3rd and the 7th, as well as some nice extensions or color tones, the 9th and the 13th. One example of a tune that incorporates the scale would be Sweet Georgia Brown. It uses a standard major pentatonic scale for the first melody statement, then shifts to the altered version to accommodate the movement to the new chord. So practice improvising with this scale over extended MIXOLYDIAN vamps, or just good old-fashioned dominant seventh chords. I'll play a little bit to let you hear how it sounds. Anytime we're dealing with dominant sevenths, that inevitably leads us to talking about the blues. This scale works really well over the 12-bar blues progression. In fact, and jazz educators take note here, I've had a lot of success teaching beginning blues players to improvise over the 12-bar form by using this scale. What you can do is have them learn the standard pentatonic scale first. Have them practice creating melodies and phrases with that for a while, not worrying about changing the third, maybe for a lesson or two, a few lessons. Then introduce the flatted third version of the scale. Have them try to hear the difference in the major third on the 1 chord and the minor third, which is the 7th of the 4 chord. You could simplify it by explaining that this is also just switching back and forth between the major and minor third of the home key. Then have them practice flatting the third of the scale when they hear the 4 chord arrive. I personally find that teaching the blues like that can be much more effective and also oriented towards melody and history, rather than by starting a brand new improviser off by saying, okay, before we even play the tune, you're not just going to learn the head, but all the chords in order, roots, thirds, fifths, sevenths, the form, all the MIXOLYDIAN scales that fit the chords, the blues scale, pentatonics, and so forth. It's just too much math and information material for most beginners to handle. They get overwhelmed and frustrated. Of course, all that stuff can come later, but this method seems to ease them into the blues, and at the same time, they learn to play in a more traditional, historical way, rather than such an academic one. Blues melodies like Centerpiece are excellent, by the way. You know, come to think of it, Centerpiece is actually built note for note on the exact scale we're talking about in this video. Another great solo to listen to is Johnny Hodges on Jeep's Blues. You'll hear bits and pieces of this scale scattered throughout that solo, usually on the 4 chord. And so with practice, and if you choose your notes and rhythms well, you can get some really nice blues phrases with this scale. Maybe something like this. half diminished chords. Sometimes players are unsure of what to do with the second note of a scale when they're playing over a half diminished chord. Should the ninth be raised or not? Is it Locrian or Locrian sharp 2, as I've seen some textbooks call it? For me, it all depends on the context. What is the chord resolving to? What chord did it come from? Tempo, key, etc. Again, that's a topic for another video. But this altered pentatonic scale solves the problem for us because we skip that note altogether. If we think of the altered pentatonic as starting on the 6th degree, or as the root of the half diminished chord, it basically just outlines the chord and sticks a nice 11th right in the middle. The 11th is a really nice, colorful, beautiful chord extension to add to a half diminished chord. So if you want an option besides Locrian or harmonic minor when you're playing over half diminished chords, this altered pentatonic works pretty nicely. We could also work with the scale over a major 7 sharp 11 chord, or any Lydian areas of sound. It has a similar melodic effect as with the Dorian or minor 6 chord that we worked on earlier. Organized in steps, the scale gives us the 13th, major 7th, root, 3rd, and sharp 11 of this chord. And lastly, if we take a look at the altered scale, we can extract the altered pentatonic from it and play it over any form of altered dominant 7th chord. It gives us flat 9, sharp 9, the 3rd, sharp 5, and the 7th. So we get the functional notes, the 3rd and the 7th, and some very colorful extensions as well. So practice this pentatonic scale up and down, inside and out, over the full range of your instrument and all the keys. Then practice as many permutations as you can think of. Turn on your metronome and just let your imagination run wild. If you really learn and apply this scale, or any kind of scale for that matter, it can help you hear and recognize patterns in your transcriptions of melodies or solos and other music you listen to, and perhaps lead you to some really cool new ideas of your own. The goal is to turn them into ideas, phrases, motives, shapes, development, statements, storytelling, things like that. So experiment and be conscious of what kind of rhythms you're playing. And don't be afraid to break some rules. Slip in chromatic notes, bends, slides, You know the deal. In jazz, the only rule is, if it sounds good, do it. If there are other applications of this scale that I haven't included, please feel free to mention them in the comments. And if this helps you, please do subscribe, share, like, all of that. I've got a lot more coming. I really appreciate you watching and listening.